Welcome. In these videos, I'm going to be going over the budgets that are introduced in Chapter 13. Before you watch any of these videos, I think you should go ahead and print out this Chapter 13 handout and familiarize yourself with the problem. It is quite a bit of information. It's a very extensive problem, very time consuming. So you're definitely going to want to take some time to really read through everything. Now, typically, if we're going over this in class, a lot of it is kind of self-explanatory, but it does help to have someone kind of walk you through it at least once. But to really get the most out of this whole experience, I highly recommend that before we do each budget, you kind of pause the video, you open the textbook, and you attempt to do the budget yourself first. So let's go ahead and get started with the sales budget. So Jeremy here plans to start a company. I believe he's making bookcases or bookshelves. Yeah, bookcases. And he plans to start this company in January of next year. So he is going to need the financial statements for the first quarter of operations. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be analyzing his sales budget for 3 months, January, February, March, and we're going to have a little total column here. So for this sales budget, it's probably one of the easiest budgets that we really have here. We're going to need a few pieces of information. We are going to need to know the estimated sales, and this is the estimated sales in units. We're also going to need to know the sales price per unit. And then when we multiply those two items together, we're going to get sales revenue. And this is one thing that I would caution you on. For those of you who have not really had a lot of experience in the field and you haven't seen the different types of budgets out there, keep in mind that you're going to see very different wording when you get out into the real world when it comes to these budgets. So estimated sales is not always the way that they're going to be wording things. They could end up calling it estimated sales in units, estimated units. The best and most important thing is to just kind of understand things in general and not just memorize the wording as you go, because I guarantee you that just memorizing this wording and not really understanding how these budgets work and flow together, that's when you're not going to be giving yourself really the full experience that you should be getting from this budgets chapter. So the estimated sales in units, it tells us that they expect 100,000 bookcases to be sold in January, 102,000 in February, and 130,000 in March. You might say, well, why do they have April? That has to do with desired ending inventory. The sales price for each one. Our anticipated sales price is going to be $500 per unit. So to get our sales revenue, simply the estimated sales in units times our sales price per unit. That'll give us exactly what we need. Now when it comes to the total column, make sure that you're not just totaling everything up. And this is where an example of if you just kind of not pay attention to what you're doing could mess things up. For example, the sales price per unit, we're not going to add everything up. We're simply adding up the units. If you did accidentally do that, that would definitely throw off your final answer here. Now that you feel comfortable with the sales budget, the next budget we are going to be taking a look at is the production budget. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you go ahead and pause for a moment and attempt this budget on your own before we do it together. So the production budget is obviously us trying to figure out how many units need to be produced in order to maintain the level of units that we really need in inventory. So the first thing we want to do is to find our estimated sales. And again, this is estimated sales in units. There's no monetary information here on the production budget. Then we also want to know is, okay, not only do we want to sell this many units, but also what is our desired ending inventory? And again, we are talking about finished goods here. So how many units do we want to sell? And then how many units do we want to have at the end of the month? and that'll tell us exactly what our total needs are for the month. Now, from our total needs, what we can do is we can subtract out our beginning inventory, again, finished goods, and then that tells us exactly what our units to be produced are. So this is kind of similar to when we were going over basic cost flow assumptions in the beginning, but we're focusing on units. So our estimated sales are the units we expect to sell, so we're going to need those. Plus, we also are going to need some type of ending inventory and finished goods. That gives us our total needs. Then if we minus out the goods that we already had in our beginning inventory at the beginning of the month, that tells us exactly what we need to produce. So if that didn't make sense, what I was just saying, try listening to that one more time and try really understanding the flow of information that's going through. So let's try to fill this in. Our estimated sales we found before, 100,000 for January, 102,000 for February, 125,000 for March. Now our desired ending inventory tells us you have decided that the company's ending finished goods inventory should be equal to 15% of next month's sales. So in January, we want our ending inventory to be 15% of next month's sales. So we're going to want 15,300 in January, 18,750 in February, and then for March, 15% of next month. Already spotting an error, 125,000 for this one. March is 100, 102, 130,000 units. There we go. So 100,000, 102,000, 130,000 for March. 125,000 is actually April. So we want 15% of 102,000, 15% of 130,000, and then for March we want 15% of April's sales, so 125,000. So if we add those two together, that's going to give us our total needs. Bring that over. All right, so now that we know our total needs, we can go ahead and get rid of some of those to figure out, or get rid of our beginning inventory to really figure out what we are going to need to produce. So beginning inventory, since this is the first month of operation, he's actually going to have 0 beginning inventory in January. Now for February, his beginning inventory is last month's ending inventory. So remember, January's ending is February's beginning, so on and so forth. And then the same thing for March. Now that we have our beginning inventory, we can go ahead and minus out our beginning inventory to really figure out our total needs. And there we go. Now when it comes to the total column, we're simply going to sum up the prior areas. Oh good, my sum's not working. And then that will give us the basic information that we need to find our total column. Notice that for this one, we don't have to do anything like before we did with the sales price and the sales budget. And basically only grab the $500 per because we are working out the math for this total. The next budget that we are going to take a look at is our direct materials budget. And this one is where things tend to get a little bit more complicated. Because you'll notice when it comes to our direct materials, these bookshelves are made of 2 different types of wood, mahogany and oak. So as we're taking a look at each one, January, February, and March, we're going to have to take that into consideration. So the first thing you want to make sure we have on our board is the units to be produced. And then for each of these, we're going to have to be analyzing the materials that are needed for mahogany and oak. Now you might ask yourself, well, can't I do one direct materials budget for the mahogany and one for the oak? Absolutely. Yes, you can. I just chose to put it in this way. And if I remember correctly, I think that's the way that our cost accounting textbook does it as well. But there are a few different ways that we could really set this up. Keep in mind, I want you to know the overall concept, not be able to just copy something down and redo a budget from memory. So with our direct materials budget, we need to know a few things. We need to know for each unit being produced, what is the direct materials that are needed per unit. So this is going to be in feet since we're dealing with wood. This is going to then tell us what we need for our total production needs. Then in addition to our production needs, when it comes to our direct materials, keep in mind our direct materials in this case is going to be our raw materials. We now need to know what is the desired ending inventory that we want for our raw materials. So before we were talking about finished goods as it related to whole units. Now we're saying, well, do we want to just be out of wood at the end of every month? No, we always want a constant supply. So we're going to have a desired ending inventory for raw materials. And then once we have that information, that's going to tell us what our direct material needs are. And then from that, obviously, we're hopefully going to have some type of beginning inventory and raw materials, at least once we get started. Obviously, this is the first month of operation, so January isn't going to have any. And then that's going to tell us exactly how much in direct materials we are going to need to purchase. But then obviously that's going to be in feet. And the ending result for the majority of direct materials budgets are typically monetary. So then we want to go ahead and put in our cost of materials. And once we multiply that through, then we should have the total cost of direct materials to be purchased. So units to be produced, again, we're going to grab this from our production budget. 115,300 for January, 106,200 for February, 129,250 for March. And then we're going to have to put in how much of direct materials is needed for each unit. So to produce one bookcase, how much mahogany and how much oak do I need? According to the problem, we need 46 feet of mahogany and 15 feet of oak for every bookcase. So that means that the total mahogany we would need in January is going to be 5,303,800. And oak, we're going to need 1,729,500. So let's go ahead and put that through for each month. All right, now that we have our total production needs, now we need to figure out the desired ending inventory for mahogany and oak each month. Now it tells us that Jeremy thinks that he should have 20,000 feet of mahogany at the end of January. And that the estimate should increase by 250 feet for each following month. So 20,000 in January, 20,250 in February, and then 20,500 in March. And then for oak, let's pull this down a little bit. He anticipates having 10,000 feet in ending inventory in January, and this estimate should increase by 200 feet for each month. All right. So adding together our total production needs and our desired ending inventory, that will give us, fill without formatting, that will give us the numbers that we really need here for each of these areas. All right, this seems like a good stopping point. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with our direct materials budget in the next video, part 2.